Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Israeli forces are continuing their deadly strikes on the Gaza Strip, killing at least 4 Palestinians today, including radio journalist Youssef Abu Hussein. Residential buildings have been leveled as the number of people who've had to flee from their homes reached at least 72,000. This is a man who was forcibly displaced from his home in Beit Lahia and is now sheltering in a UN-run school.
We all moved out except for the wife of my brother and 3 of her children. They died at home. We left them there. Then the ambulance service arrived and moved them from under the rubble, dead. They sleep on the ground, in the shelter. There's not enough water. And if we are out of water, especially during the corona pandemic, it will be worse. It is crowded here. There are around 30 to 40 people in each classroom.
The Israeli bombing campaign has killed at least 222 Palestinians in Gaza, including 63 children. Here in the U.S., President Biden landed in Detroit, Michigan Tuesday, where he was greeted on the tarmac by Congressmember Rashida Tlaib. An aide to the Palestinian-American congresswoman said she urged the president to protect Palestinian human rights and told Biden that U.S. military funding to Israel is being used to commit crimes against Palestinians. Later, speaking at the Ford plant, President Biden addressed Congressmember Tlaib.
I admire your intellect, I admire your passion, and I admire your concern for so many other people. And it's from my heart, I pray that your grandmom and family are well. I promise you I'm going to do everything to see that they are on the West Bank. You're a fighter, and God, thank you for being a fighter.
Also during his Michigan trip, Biden joked he would run over reporters who asked about the escalating crisis in Israel-Palestine as he test drove an electric truck in the city of Dearborn. Multiple protests took place in Dearborn, which has the nation's highest percentage of Arab-American citizens during Biden's trip. Protests continued elsewhere in the U.S. as well. Here in New York City, people rallied in front of the United Nations, Senator Schumer's office, and the offices of AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, and Friends of the Israel Defense Forces. This is a protester at a Los Angeles rally Tuesday.
The message to the U.S. government is to stop funding Israel with $3.8 billion in military aid a year. The message to Israel is that you cannot have a two-state plan and be preaching peace while you have people behind walls and being bombed and murdered and land stolen from them. That is not the way to peace.
We'll have more on these stories after headlines. 60% of U.S. adults have now received at least 1 dose of a COVID-19 vaccine, as data shows cases are declining by 5% or more in almost every state. Over 3.5 million kids and teenagers aged 12 to 17 have also received at least 1 dose. New York City is relaxing many of its coronavirus restrictions today and is lifting its statewide mask mandate for fully vaccinated people. Houses of worship and businesses, including restaurants, can open at 100% capacity, but must allow for 6 feet of distance between groups or use partitions if social distancing is not possible. New Jersey and Connecticut are also lifting many of their restrictions starting today. A major new report from the International Energy Agency says licensing for new fossil fuel projects needs to end after this year if the world is to reach net zero targets by 2050. Oil, gas, and coal projects would need to be phased out as quickly as possible in order to have a chance of limiting global heating to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels and averting the worst effects of the climate catastrophe. Climate activists say the report should act as a wake-up call. Oil Change International said, quote, today's report should herald the end of any excuses for continued fossil fuel expansion. In North Carolina, protesters took to the streets of Elizabeth City after the county district attorney said the deputies who shot and killed Andrew Brown Jr., an African-American man, were justified in their actions and that Brown endangered them by quote, recklessly driving in their direction. DA Andrew Womble said the men will not face charges and will be reinstated. The prosecutor showed for the first time a portion of the body cam video to the press, but advocates say it was cherry-picked and calls are mounting to release all body cam tape. Videos seen by Brown's family show he did not drive toward deputies, and an autopsy confirmed Brown was killed by a shot to the back of his head. We'll have more on the story later in the broadcast with the family attorney, Bakari Sellers. The House of Representatives passed legislation Tuesday to address hate crimes against Asian Americans, which have increased exponentially during the pandemic. This is New York Congressmember Grace Meng, who first introduced the bill over a year ago.
Asian Americans are tired of living in fear and being frightened about their kids or elderly parents going outside. People often ask what Congress is doing about this, and we are here today to say that Congress is taking action.
The legislation tasked the Justice Department with expediting the review of hate crimes, facilitates the creation of hate crime hotlines, and provides funding for law enforcement to train officers in identifying hate crimes. A bill has already passed the Senate. President Biden is expected to sign the measure. At least 57 refugees drowned off the coast of Tunisia after their boat capsized Monday. 33 people originally from Bangladesh were rescued. The tragedy comes just days after another shipwreck in the same route from Libya to Europe killed at least 17 refugees. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez traveled today to the Spanish enclave of Ceuta on the northern tip of Morocco after 8,000 refugees entered the area earlier this week. Spain has sent troops to the enclave's border and has already returned thousands of people, but groups say officials may be expelling people that legally should be processed as asylum seekers, including children, sick people, and anyone who is not a Moroccan national. Many say Morocco recently loosened immigration controls in retaliation for Spain giving Brahim Ghali, the leader of the Polisario Front, treatment for COVID-19. The Polisario movement is fighting to establish an independent state in Western Sahara, which was colonized by Spain in the 19th century and illegally annexed by Morocco in 1975. At least 5 top Salvadoran officials, including political allies of Salvadoran President Nayib Bukele, have been named in a confidential U.S. State Department report as suspects in drug trafficking or corruption schemes. Among the officials are Bukele's current chief of cabinet and his former minister of security. The report was sent to Congress Monday at the request of California Democratic Congressmember Norma Torres. The New York Times is reporting the Biden administration's approved the release of 3 prisoners who've been held at the U.S. military prison in Guantanamo Bay without charge for 2 decades. The men, who are from Pakistan and Yemen, will reportedly be released to countries that have agreed to impose surveillance measures on them. While advocates welcome Biden's move, they say it's not enough and continue to call for shutting down Guantanamo. The ACLU said, quote, an end to almost 2 decades of military detention of Muslim men without charge or trial is a human rights obligation and a national security necessity, they said. At least 9 of the 40 remaining prisoners at Guantanamo have been approved for release. Some have been waiting for years for another country to take them in. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has formally apologized for a 1911 massacre in which over 300 Chinese people were killed by Mexican revolutionary troops in the northern city of Torreón. Among the victims were children and agricultural workers. The massacre took place during the Mexican Revolution of 1910 to 1920 and was part of a wave of anti-Chinese violence in the region. There are no monuments acknowledging the massacre, and it's been largely excluded from most accounts of Mexican history. This is President López Obrador at a ceremony Monday, days after the May 13th massacre anniversary.
Mexico apologizes to the families of the victims of this authoritarian repression that was committed by movements, organizations, and governments of our country. The Mexican state will not allow ever again racism, discrimination, and xenophobia.
In Philadelphia, District Attorney Larry Krasner handily won the Democratic nomination against his challenger, Carlos Vega, Tuesday. Vega is a former homicide prosecutor who was fired by Krasner after he took office in 2018. Krasner is credited with lowering Philadelphia's prison population, halting the prosecution of drug possession and other low-level offenses, and reversing around 20 wrongful convictions. But he's also come under criticism for opposing the appeals of political prisoner and journalist Mumia Abu-Jamal. Krasner will face a Republican defense lawyer, Charles Bruto Jr., in the November general election. Meanwhile, in Pittsburgh, State Representative Ed Gainey defeated incumbent Bill Peduto for the Democratic mayoral nomination. Tuesday's win means Gainey is likely to become Pittsburgh's first black mayor. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy says he'll oppose the bipartisan deal to form a 9/11-style commission to investigate the deadly January 6th insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. McCarthy suggested a congressional inquiry was not needed and said he would not support it since it will not examine, quote, political violence on the left, he said, which is unrelated to the insurrection. The Biden administration's voiced support for the bipartisan commission. And in labor news, an Amazon worker at the Bessemer, Alabama warehouse testified last week he saw Amazon security guards use keys to open a U.S. post office box that was used to collect ballots on the historic Union vote. The mailbox was unlawfully installed by the USPS at Amazon's request. The labor union that organized the workers in Bessemer has accused Amazon of anti-union threats, firing an employee for distributing union cards, and creating, quote, an impression of surveillance during the voting period. The National Labor Relations Board continues its hearing on the case this week. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York, joined by Democracy Now! Co-host Juan Gonzalez in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Hi, Juan.
Hi, Amy, and welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.